Hey, right, everyone. Welcome to this evening's live stream. Sorry, it's an hour late. That's my fault. But yeah, I did. Also, if you're wondering what that bump on my head is, I just bumped my head on the garage door today, which is great. So you're welcome. For everyone who's here, in fact, I've just got to do a few other bits and pieces in the back office. Otherwise, this doesn't work properly. Why is that not working? Hold on. There we go. Cool. And then, so yeah, if you're new to the live stream, this is just us trying to be helpful as best we can to answer questions as they come in. Um, Obviously, this is on YouTube, so it's not legal advice. We will try our best. Obviously, as well, there's going to be sometimes where information is not always clear, and so we can't give the best answer. But as I say, we'll give it a good shot. If you're asking questions in the live stream, please don't share questions that basically involve your personal data. So ask questions like as if you're asking hypothetical questions like, what if someone was in temporary accommodation for 8 weeks? What would they do? That's the way to phrase questions. And the questions that have come in through the week, I'll prioritize them first. I haven't actually looked at the questions properly other than copying and pasting them ready to go tonight. So hopefully they all make sense. So yeah, we'll start with them. Other bits and pieces. What else have I got to say? I feel like I've done that, done that. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say. Yeah, and I don't know if there's any kind of gossip from you guys this week. So I know there's some stuff rumbling around with the end of Section 21. There's a bit more clarity on that. They're looking at it's going to come in sort of summer 2025. So there's that. I can just notice that in the news. There wasn't any good LJ cases this week. Hey, you are, Gary. Nice to have you here, mate. So yeah, let's get on with it. Basically, let me just share the screen as normal, and I'll start with the first question, which is fairly long, but that's all right. Any gossip from you guys at all? Anything I missed? I'm rushing around today, so I feel like I could have forgotten all sorts of things. Um, cool. So let's zoom in a little bit. So question one is, as I say, it's quite a long one, and it's probably going to be multiple parts. So let's give it our best effort. So a friend submitted a homeless application in February after receiving Section 21. The claim for possession was struck out by the judge in July. He then received a new Section 21 in August. He got in touch with the council again in October, just before the Section 21 expired. Now he's waiting for court. Also, he's waiting to know if he's considered in priority need by the council. So the housing officer has asked to resubmit more recent medical letters and forms to assess vulnerability, despite he already submitted them in February. For social housing list purposes and change of banding, he was already on the housing list before, but not as homeless. From when should the application be considered homeless? No, yeah, that's sorry, misreading it. From when should the applicant be considered homeless? In this case, from February or from October. The Housing Register Allocation scheme says if you approach the council within 56 days of when you're due to become homeless, we have a duty to assist you under the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017. It's weird that they still call it the HRA. I mean, Will might correct me on this, but it's still the Housing Act 1996. It's just been amended by the HRA, so it's still Housing Act. But anyway, this requires us to give you housing priority. Okay, there's a lot in this question. It's a good question. Planning system description. I don't know if I've missed something there. Your preference date will be the date of your homelessness application. The housing officer is deliberately unclear, but my friend would like to know where he stands legally, at least, if they will assess the situation retrospectively. Did he gain more time on the housing or on a higher band? So, good question. There's a few bits I guess we need to pick out from this. And just sorry, Gary, just to say, I've just noticed, just to say, we're talking about English law today, but there will be quite a lot of crossover with Welsh law. So, but I don't know which bits are the same, which bits aren't the same. So, forgive me. We're going to be talking about a few things so we're going to be talking about vulnerability in a minute. My understanding is the definition is almost the same in Wales. In fact, it's a bit better in Wales. So anyway, yeah, let's look at this. So my guess is that the claim was struck out because there was an issue with the notice being invalid. So if you look into the homelessness credit guidance, which is the council's rule book, it basically says that you're threatened with homelessness if you've been served with a valid Section 21 notice, which by the sound of it, it wasn't valid, which would mean that you weren't threatened with homelessness until the new Section 21 was issued. And we're going to assume that this one is valid, although it's always worth checking out. So, got in touch with so the Section 21 is now expired. Unless there's a good reason not to, you're now legally homeless. So the relief duty should have kicked in. The only exceptions to that would normally be where the council is trying to negotiate with your landlord to try and let you stay there longer. But if that's unlikely to be successful, then in most cases, and there's not a lot of guidance on which cases wouldn't be, you're going to be classed as legally homeless. So yeah, as I say, from you would know this if the relief duty has been accepted yet, or whether you're still under prevention duty. There's more to say about that, but let's try and circle back to it. So this person's already on the on the social housing list. Now the banding would basically, even if that person had been on the banding for years, even potentially in a high priority, we don't know the full circumstances. Once you're threatened with homelessness, so once the prevention duty has been accepted, effectively that's a change in circumstances, and you'll probably, or it's going to depend on different councils, but most councils would then reband you in a specific banding, and often it's quite a low banding for the prevention duty. So I'm hoping that answers some of the question here. So yeah, so when the Housing Register Allocation scheme says if you approach the council within 56 days of when you're due to become homeless, so I would say that back in February, that because the Section 21 wasn't valid, that did not come into play, but it has come into play now. And I would say technically you should now be dealt with under the relief duty rather than the prevention duty. But probably on the housing registry, it'll be the same banding for both prevention and relief. And then it says your preference date will be the date of your homeless application. So essentially, whenever you made, I mean, I'd be surprised if that's actually not them just being sloppy. Most banding would basically, well, what would matter is the date that they accept the main housing duty, which may or may not happen yet because we've got this question of vulnerability as well in terms of priority needs. So I think I've kind of introduced the issues there, but I've not done a good job of fully answering them yet. But yeah, does anyone else want to jump in at this point to kind of fill in anything I might have missed, or kind of, as I say, I think we can probably give a more holistic answer at the end of this, but there's quite a lot in it to unpack. So has anyone got anything they want to kind of come in at this point and talk about? If not, I'll keep rolling on. But
I haven't got anything else to add to that, really.
okay, so let's go and actually look at what's the crux of the issue. My guess is that, as I say, you'll need to check out what banding you now get as someone who is owed either prevention duty or the relief duty. And that date that you made the application will, I guess, will define that banding. But the thing is with the prevention and relief duty, because it doesn't last that long in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not actually going to be the thing that gets you housed. What's more likely to get you housed is if you're in priority need and you were going to assume here that you're not intentionally homeless because it's a Section 21, and we're going to assume you've got local connection, so that's not going to kick in at all, is my guess. So what's really going to matter is if the main duty is accepted, then that's when you'll get this new banding, which in most councils is like the second highest band. It does vary, but a lot of councils it'll be like band B or band silver or whatever. And that's kind of when the timer starts ticking, really. So all the time this person might have spent on the housing register before this all happened essentially just gets written off. It has no relevance now. You will get a new banding when the main housing duty is accepted, or if the main housing duty is accepted. We'll come back to that in a minute. And that'll be the kind of that'll be the thing that probably gets you housed. Now, some councils well away from London, you might have a reasonable chance of getting housed when you're still under prevention or relief duty, but it's unusual. So that would then bring us back to touch on this issue of priority need through vulnerability. And so it's probably not unreasonable for the council to request fresh medical information, because even if you've got long-term issues, the council still wants to get an up-to-date kind of understanding of what's going on. But more than providing medical letters, just kind of generic medical letters, if you can, you're much better off getting specific medical opinion about what would happen to you if you become homeless, because that's really the crux of it. Now, we've talked on Will's channel recently about the fact that doctors are increasingly less likely to actually give anything useful at all. They kind of resent the fact that they're getting requests for letters, which we kind of said was a bit off. But so if you've got a good GP, they'll potentially write you some kind of supporting letter, but it needs to focus specifically on not what your diagnoses are, but what's going to happen to you as a whole person if you become homeless. And if you've got a pre-existing condition which is going to be made worse by being homeless, that's when you get into the ballpark of being in priority need. And in this case, whether you're in priority need or not is going to make all the difference. So if you're not in priority need, again, depending on the council, but most councils, you're not going to have a hope of actually getting housed during this process. So that, I think, is my answer, which I hope kind of takes into account all the different moving parts here. Has anyone got anything else to add in, or can anyone else see an element of this question which I didn't just cover? No, getting shakes from Will, which will go with that. So that's
I
question one.
mean,
Well, you got Shannon? Yeah, go for it.
yeah, such a small point, but the fact that they said like the housing officer's deliberately unclear, like I'd be keeping a record of any communications where you've asked the housing officer this question and you've had a response that is unclear or is deliberately confusing or whatever, and at the end of this process make a complaint. It's not something to be thinking about now, but actually making sure all of your correspondence and communications are in written form or via email, and making a note of that sort of stuff, so you can sort of complain at the end of the process, is the only other thing to add in, which isn't really what they're asking, but
Yeah, no, this is sound advice for sure. Thanks, Shannon. Whilst I remember it, I did have something to share, which is that Shannon and myself are talking at an event next week by Public Law Project, which is a bit of an odd event in the fact that it's kind of spread over several days, like kind of hour or 2 hour slots. But for those people out there who are listening to this because they want to help other people and they want to kind of improve services locally, then it might be a useful event for you to have a look at. I'm just going to share the kind of link to it. If you're coming from a grassroots organisation, it is effectively free, although they do ask you to put a bit of money towards it, which is fair enough. So I'm going to put that into live chat anyway, if you want to just check that out. And also, we've gone. Sorry, Shannon.
I was just saying, I believe as well, if you've got lived experience and you're interested, I think if you email them and sort of explain, I think there are again free tickets for that as well.
Yeah, cool. As far as I can tell, tickets are still available. So, yeah, as I say, I mean, the title of the event is Influencing Law and Policy, which we found in Bedford is there's some real good opportunities to do that on a local level, if not on a national level. So yeah, as I say, links in the chat there, and also I'm not going to bother sharing the link, but if you ever want to, if you work in a professional capacity or if you're kind of in a voluntary capacity, we do regular online training where we cover the basics of this in a kind of a more regimented format. So the next date for that is the 22nd of November. Check out the link in the description for more info on that. Anyway, cool. Right, let's get back to the questions. So this is a question on a similar theme to what we've just kind of touched on there. How about a single 41-year-old with mental health and been assessed for ADHD, lost a job and currently depressed and homeless? She's been sofa surfing for 7 months. Can she get social housing? Bear in mind she has no income for private rent. So yeah, good question here. So I guess no matter what your situation, if you're, this person's sofa surfing, so it's very likely that they're homeless. I say very likely because it's a bit of a grey area, but if unless you're kind of sofa surfing with a family member in your own room and you've been there for years, then you're going to be homeless. So you need to work out which council you want to approach. If usually local connections are a factor in that, but it's not always decisive. And basically make a homeless application, or I guess you could just apply directly to the housing register. But actually, lots of policies these days would actually make it very difficult for you to actually get onto the register without presenting as homeless. So yeah, make a homeless application. If you want to find out how to do that, there's a video on this channel called The Best Way to Make a Homeless Application, which is very, very pedantic, but this is a very, very pedantic legal process. So I'd highly recommend you follow those steps rather than just kind of wandering into a council's housing office, because that's the worst thing you can do. So that's kind of, that would be your starting point. And the question then would be, would you be in priority need? Now we're going to assume here we're talking about somebody who's got recourse to public funds. So mental health issues are very, very relevant for priority needs. The threshold, in my opinion, is pretty low, to be honest. There just needs to be something which is essentially noticeable about your situation that would differentiate you from a person without your condition, and that would likely lead to an increased risk of harm if you were homeless. I've kind of paraphrased a lot of different bits of case law in there. It's something like that now. So, and when we talk about mental health, that could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could obviously be psychotic kind of health issues, or it could be things like OCD, or just anything under that umbrella, really. Now, I would, and the others might disagree with me on this point, but on my limited knowledge of what ADHD is, I would struggle to see how ADHD in itself is going to mean that you're in priority needs, because it's a kind of it's a functional test. Question is, how are you going to cope with the effects of being homeless? And I guess you would need to present an argument or present a case for you, or how it's going to particularly affect you being homeless. And as I say, the people I know with ADHD, they can kind of manage things. It might take them longer, but that's not going to stop them finding accommodation in itself. And I guess it's not. Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna. I would struggle to see how you're going to make your case based on that. Shannon's like shaking her head to that. So Shannon, go for it.
I just like so I've I know a few people with ADHD, and I think I could see their ADHD being sort of more exacerbated and more triggered if they became homeless, because all routine, all structure is gone. So their normal sort of coping abilities that mean they can function with their sort of ADHD on a day-to-day basis is actually taken away from them. Which would, like, for again, and I think want to be careful because there's a lot of information about ADHD on social media. But ADHD is so much broader than sort of like what we see in social media. And it can also be affect like your emotions and how you sort of perceive other people emotions. So yeah, for the people I know anyway, I would say actually them being sort of homeless, it would affect their ability to cope with that, because it would exacerbate all of the symptoms of ADHD, without sort of any, not comfort factors, but without any of those coping strategies in place. So that's how I would sort of, yeah.
I think you need to add in, and I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm saying you need to add in. So okay, ADHD will be exacerbated by being homeless, but you need to show what the harmful effect is. And ADHD, with the absence of other things like depression or anxiety, I don't. I don't know. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying I
I
think you'd
think it
have to
depends
kind of
on
make
like
that quite carefully.
individual, like all priority needs, it depends on individual circumstances. But say like managing your affairs, if you're homeless and actually you don't have somewhere for your letters, which was your coping mechanism, was you always, because of your ADHD, you've got a specific place where you put them, and actually you don't have that, and then you like rack up debts, or like that's a harmful effect, I would say, or the stress and the sort of panic that often again is associated with ADHD, and the emotional distress would be a harm. That,
Yeah.
yeah, I could
No,
be barking up the
no,
wrong tree there. Will's just nodded.
no. I think that those harmful effects you just said are absolutely valid. That, and I guess I'm saying, okay, so then you've got ADHD alongside other health issues, and the ADHD is going to contribute to that, to those other issues getting worse. That's how I would kind of make the argument, probably. To say I'm not, I
I
can't think
think
of any cases where I've read where ADHD was kind of really considered very carefully. So yeah,
I
that's
think
not
it's
to
a
mean it can't
difficult
be
one
done.
as well if they're still being assessed. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like most people I've met, whether they've been clients or whatever, through that have sofa surfed, most of the time they've already approached the local authority for help. So they've already been gate kept in one way. And if this is a single 41-year-old, I'm going to assume they've been gate kept with priority need. And so actually, if they got that assessment, that would be a change in relevant facts. So they could make that fresh application. Um, and I don't know as well, it says like with mental health and ADHD, it could be more than one, or they could be including ADHD within the mental health bracket. I don't know. But yeah,
That's how I'm reading it. Yeah, I think there's other health issues as well. Karis?
Sorry, I was just going to add that under the Equality Act, so being ADHD is considered neurodivergent. It's a form of neurodivergence, and that is considered as a disability under the Equality Act, so Section 6. So that would, same with mental health, that could be
Yeah,
argued for
and
a disability for priority need and vulnerabilities.
yeah, and that would mean, if nothing else, the council are going to have to very carefully kind of consider all of the things we're talking about here. So they can't just rattle off a template letter.
And also how they interact with you, making reasonable adjustments and things like that.
Yeah, which is going to be very relevant to how they communicate and how they communicate complicated information, I guess, particularly.
Like
Yeah.
if that person doesn't understand what the council say to them, ask them, can you explain that?
Yeah. I think I passed that bit of feedback on last week, Karis. You kind of said similar bit of advice for someone else, and they got back to us the next day and said, you know, that made the difference. They went and used it, and it kind of changed the situation for them.
Brilliant.
So yeah, I think the extent of it was I tagged you in on LinkedIn when I kind of gave the quote. So yeah, to check out LinkedIn for that. Will, did you want to add anything to this this part of the question? I mean, there's a question on the live stream which is kind of links into it, so we're going to stay on this topic for a minute, I think.
Quickly then, I'll just say, looking at the NHS website and the consideration of the symptoms, I think you remember there's two different sort of ways of looking at vulnerability. One is the sort of thing where you'd suffer harm as a result of the condition, and the other is where you might have difficulty coping with the effects of homelessness. And the distinction between the two is that coping with the effects usually means your ability to find alternative accommodation as distinct from suffering harm. And I think ADHD is particularly relevant to the second of those, because if you listen to these symptoms that are associated with ADHD in adults, you've got carelessness and lack of attention to detail, continually starting new tasks before finishing old ones, poor organizational skills, inability to focus on or prioritize, continually losing or misplacing things. And so it goes on. So all of those things I think would make it quite difficult. And then if to cope with the effects of homelessness in terms of sort of keeping it together, and then the condition itself might it might sort of escalate and feed on itself in that you become restless and edgy and impulsive and and it says mood swings, irritability, and quick temper. So you could get into difficulty in dealing with others. So yeah, I think it's not. But the problem with ADHD, sorry, is as with depression, is just the label itself isn't enough. You'd have to get some medical saying this person has ADHD, as a result of which they have these symptoms. And presumably, if they had got a formal diagnosis, somebody could expand on that. So that's my contribution to that one.
So let's as I say, let's stay on the this kind of topic for a moment, because someone's just asked a kind of a related question here, which basically says, it's a good question. What mental health issues qualify people to get accommodation quickly? Now, the quickest way to get accommodated is almost certainly going to be by making a homeless application, which is when, you know, what we're talking about here in terms of priority needs. And as Will's just said, there is no kind of diagnosis in itself which is going to mean you're a priority need. There's always a kind of a functional aspect to it. So, you know, what are the effects of that diagnosis or that condition if that person was to become homeless? And bottom line is, certainly most mental health issues, they're going to be made worse by being home. So I appreciate I just said, you know, bearing in mind what we just said about ADHD, but certainly, you know, every other mental health issue I can think of is going to be made noticeably worse by being homeless. And so there's going to be an argument that can be made. Now, you are sometimes going to, you know, maybe you've got diagnosed with depression, but actually it's been managed effectively by your medication or whatever. And then, yeah, the council could legitimately reach a decision that you're not in priority need, you know, if they ask the right questions of the doctor and so on. But then if you were then homeless for a few weeks and your mental health got worse, you can then kind of reapproach, as Shannon was saying, and kind of, there's the fact that you've actually got worse in itself is evidence that you're in priority need. But again, there's not like a knockout diagnosis. Even, you know, technically speaking, even something like, you know, stage 4 cancer is not in itself automatically mean you're going to be in priority need, although it almost certainly will do in practice. But you've always got to make the argument. So yeah, and bearing in mind that a lot of housing officers get training. I mean, I've seen training that came through Now Medical. This is going back years, so I'm hoping they're better than this now. But it would kind of give a list of diagnoses and sort of say, well, you know, if you've got a psychotic mental health issue, then yeah, that's you know, you're probably going to be in priority. And if it's just depression, then you're not going to be in priority need. So the training housing officers do get is terrible often, and so you're having to navigate that as well. So again, if you want to kind of find out more of the detail on that, just check. There's a few videos on this channel. There's one which I think is called A Judge Explains Priority Needs, which is Sarah Steinhardt, who's a very, very capable barrister and judge, and she's talking about you know, kind of in a few cases in a bit more detail. I mean, we'll have done some longer videos about it as well. So there is quite a lot of detail to go into it, but don't fall into the trap of saying I have this diagnosis, therefore I'm in priority need, because you need to do more than that. If you do, if that's all you do, even if you are blatantly in priority need, the council are most likely just going to knock you back and just say you're not in priority need. Just, not a situation you want to really get into. So as I say, it's a really good set. It's kind of really important topic. I'd say probably the most important topic of all of them, really. Which we could talk about all day for, but I think I'm hoping that is helpful in itself, but also the videos on the rest of the channel is also probably going to add to that as well. So next question, let's come from the live stream. And so far, guys, thank you for anonymizing it all, makes it easy for me. So number 4, would they have to inform Universal Credit when the council has said they're homeless, but still will be evicted in 2 months? So I'm going to go to Shannon on this one because Shannon knows a lot about DWP. I mean, I would say why would you'd want to inform them, I guess, in terms of the work coach and stuff, but I don't have to, I don't think, immediately. Shannon, what's your opinion about this one?
So if you're homeless because of Section 21, I mean, it's probably worth putting it in your journal. You wouldn't have to do a change of circumstances till a change of circumstances has actually happened, if that makes sense. Again, if you've got like work commitments or anything like that, like it's worth putting it in your journal because you might be able to pause commitments whilst you're packing up your house, or do you know what I mean? You wouldn't preemptively do a change of circumstances to affect like your housing element and stuff. If you're getting that, so
yeah,
answered it.
That does answer it. You've just started sounding like a bit of a robot, Shannon. We could hear what you said, but it's just I don't know if your connection's just gone weird or something. I don't think it's my end, but let's just give it a minute and see if it sorts itself out. We can hear you. It's fine. It's all good. Cool. So, right, I'm just going to. I've realised I've already gone off track here a little bit. I'd try and answer the questions that are coming through the week that are anonymised first, and then get into the ones from the live stream. So just bear with me, guys. There's some quick ones which we're going to do. We're going to just bounce through nice and easily. So, question 5: can you ask a housing officer to be changed, or can you ask for a housing officer to be changed? I guess someone just completely rude and lack sympathy. Absolutely, they do. Really difficult situation because in some situations, if you ask for a different housing officer, they'll deliberately give you the same one because they know you don't get on, and they'll kind of know that you're going to more likely to give up. There are a couple of situations, or certainly one I can think off the top of my head, where you can insist, and that would be where, let's say, for example, you're a victim of domestic abuse, and you can insist on being dealt with by a housing officer of the same gender. So they have no option about that situation, and I guess a good council would be, if you're a decent housing options manager and you've got you've got a homeless person who doesn't get on with the housing officer, you would look to change it. But I would say that the number of councils who actually would be reasonable at that is probably quite a low number in my experience, anyway. So, I would difficult to really kind of say what your options are, what the best option is. But I would say potentially you might just need to ride out just having a horrible housing officer. Because in one sense, kind of raising an issue might make them even more horrible and not result in them getting changed. But I appreciate there will be times when you can ask for a different officer and you might get one. So, I mean, in a lot of councils these days, without meaning to be sounding kind of too facetious, if you wait around a couple of months, there'll probably be a different housing officer anyway because they've probably moved on. But yeah, I know that doesn't really answer the question. So, yeah. Just bear with me a sec, checking there's nothing that's kind of tying in with this from the chat. So there's another question here, which is I guess touches on what we've already talked about. So what's the case if the house is sold from under your feet and you're retired? So again, if we're assuming here we're talking about Section 21 notice, so we've already kind of covered that, I guess, in a fair amount of detail about approaching the council and so on. And I guess this kind of touches on the idea of, is there a set age limit at which you're in priority need? And again, the answer is no. There's not a set age limit. The older you get, the more likely it is you're in priority need. But, you take someone like Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who just walked across Antarctica, probably isn't vulnerable, even though he's well into his 70s, if not his 80s. Whereas you might have someone who's younger and has other health issues. So yeah, there is no kind of set age, but you want to be making a homeless application anyway. Again, using the steps I set out in that video. If you want to kind of not learn learn from your errors or whatever. Yeah, anyone want to add anything to that one, guys? If not, we're going to just kind of wade through these ones that are coming through the week.
Just a really small point that you're not. I still sound like a robot.
Yeah.
Don't worry then.
Just do your thing, leave and come back. Yeah, just drop out and
I'll
then
leave
just
it
jump
back.
back in. I'm sure what you had to say was really important, Shannon. Oh, she's gone. Next question. What if you have registered and applied online for social housing, waiting this 2 years ago whilst you're working, but was looking for cheap option for rent, and your application is still active, but your current circumstances have changed, and you're now homeless and vulnerable single person? Can they offer you social housing? So, actually, this is something we covered in the first question, but I realised there's actually an aspect to the question we didn't actually answer. Having said all this stuff about making a homeless application still does not guarantee you're going to get social housing. In London, you're still not going to get social housing. We had those stats back from Camden last week. And although the average waiting time for a single person for social housing wasn't that ridiculous, it was maybe a couple of years, they'd only made 2 allocations of social housing for single homeless people that year. So that would say to me that the vast majority of people who are owed the main housing duty are getting private sector discharges, which should be suitable. It should be, half decent private rented accommodation that is a 12-month tenancy. But that there's no guarantee of getting social housing in that way. So yeah, and bottom line is, with all these kind of changes of circumstances, you want to update the council, because you might think, oh well, if I update the council, it's going to get worse for me. They'll find out eventually. They're not going to house you by accident. So you do want to keep them up to date about that, and just let them know, you're now homeless, and that should then immediately trigger a homeless application and all that follows from that. Cool.
Am I
Next
still
one is
ready?
maybe, I'm not sure. It was different. Say something else again.
Well, my different form of robot this time.
No, you're good. You're fine now. You're fine. All good.
Human again.
Turning
The
off and
only
turning on
thing
again.
I was
That's
gonna
what it's all about.
The only thing I was going to quickly add to question 6, which was a big build up to really not great advice. But for some older people, they might have more savings in the bank. So just to be aware that it might affect sort of housing benefits when it comes to temporary accommodation. And also, again, not all retired people, but you might be quicker housed to go into sheltered accommodation. Yeah, that was
That's
it.
very true. Yeah, I mean, sheltered housing, like in some areas, they'll just grab your hand off. That's a really good point. Thanks, Shannon. It was worth the wait. So number 8, I'm not going to cover this in detail now, but it's a good kind of topic. So could you please make a video on how to make sense of the subject access request data? If the council sends us lots of bits of info as part of our file, what is the list of things we should look for, and how do we know what's missing? Really good question. I will do a proper video about this. But essentially, what you'll often find within the paperwork you get back when you request your records, there will be the council's own index of your records. So there'll be like a document. It might not look very special, but there'll be a document which is essentially a chronology of all the different interactions you've had with the council in date order often. And so that's your kind of starting point, because that gives you an index to then kind of piece everything else together. And in terms of knowing what's missing, you won't always know, but there'll sometimes be situations where you know for a full well that you sent them an email and they didn't include that back in your records, and they should do. So that's something that would kind of give you the idea that then they've not responded to all, they haven't searched properly for all your documents on their file. But yeah, I do a better video about that in a bit more detail, because I love that kind of stuff, because that's when you kind of make your case for the complaint. That's when you start knowing how much compensation you're going to get for someone. But yeah, some subject access requests result in hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff which you have to wade through, and there's no easy way of doing it really. So yeah, cool. Then the final 2 questions of the week are not anonymized. So that means we can go to the live stream, and we'll come back to those ones later. So let's have a look where we're up to. Thanks for all the questions, guys. Really good. Now's a good time to like and share the video if you're finding this useful. If you haven't subscribed already, if you do subscribe, you'll get notifications of when new content comes up, including the live stream. So I'm hoping those who are subscribed did get a message from me about an hour ago saying that we're going to be late tonight. I did mean to send it earlier today, but I was in a cafe and I couldn't get into it. But anyway, so yeah, so let's have a look what we've got. Um, so question 9. No, that's not the right document. Question 9. My friend's homeless prevention officer has not responded for 1 to 2 months and not taken things seriously. What can she do? So standard response to this is complain to the chief exec, and just because you're homeless, it's important. The fact that they haven't got enough capacity to fulfill their duty is their problem. You know, it was their job to make sure they had enough capacity to do it, and they haven't done it. So it's not your fault; it's their fault. And so they raising a complaint is the only effective way I know of actually getting a response out of them. And yes, that does run the risk of annoying the housing officer, meaning they're probably more shitty with you, but equally it can be actually kind of hold them to more account, and they kind of then give you their best best Sunday best kind of response to you. Will, you're unmuted. Have you got something to add in at this point? Or
There was. I was going to add something about the last question on the from the Facebook, but I've forgotten what it was. So
yeah, it'll come back to you. It's all good. So next question, number 10. I have another friend, this person, I've got a lot of friends, who wants to move out of London to a certain place in Kent, as there are family there. How can she move her family to that area from London? Now, my initial answer is, without knowing the different policies that are in Kent in terms of housing register, that the only way you'd be able to do it is if you are genuinely homeless in London. So unless you're homeless in London, you can apply to the housing register in the Kent district, but they're just going to say you're suitably housed, so there's nothing we don't need to do anything. Now, this person may well have local connection. If they are homeless in London, then they can definitely approach that Kent local authority. Is much more likely that they're going to get housed in months rather than years, or years rather than decades. Let's say it like that. So it can be done in that situation. Other than that, you're going to have to the person's going to have to do private rented accommodation in Kent and have a look for it. But we all know that private rented accommodation is very rarely actually affordable for people who are on low income. So that would be my answer to that would be, unless you're homeless, I don't think you're going to be able to do it. Having said that, I know that if you go as far as Dover, then Dover's housing register policy is a lot more flexible than, let's say, Bexley. So yeah, you have to check out that district's housing allocation scheme to see what their policy is. But my experience is you probably won't get on it if you're deemed to be suitably housed in London. Do you guys want to add anything to that one at all? Right, cool. Okay, so yeah, so and just someone just put a note, just a good suggestion there in terms of contacting the CEO. So the council, every council obviously has a chief exec, although I guess some councils have like an acting chief exec. They won't always have the council's chief exec's email on their council system. However, you will be able to Google the chief exec's name. So if the chief exec's name was Will Flack, then you just literally just add will.flack@bedford.gov.uk, and you can kind of guess what their email address is going to be. I guess it's not 100% reliable because there might be 2 Will Flacks that work for Bedford Borough Council, but yeah, generally you'll be able to kind of find it out that way. And I mean, yeah, they should make their kind of email publicly available. They should be transparent in that manner. They should be approachable in that manner. It won't be the chief exec whoever actually reads your email. It'll be their PA probably, but it has the same effect. Karis?
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, literally just Google the chief executive of that council and it should come up because it's usually public. So just Google it first.
Yeah. As I say, I don't know if there's a law saying they have to have their chief exec's email address online, but a lot of councils do. And as I say, even if they don't, you can kind of guess it, try to work it out. So yeah, cool. Thanks for that person's suggestion there. So someone asked the housing team what the average housing register waiting time for 1-bedroom property. They replied, but diverted my question and said, we're not able to give timescale with each property short. Right, okay, so that person, if you just want to put in the chat which district you're talking about, I might well actually have the number because I've been FOIing every council in the country about this. So if you want to just put in which one it is, yeah, and I'll try and figure that out. just someone just put Will Flack 1 and Will Flack 2. Just to note that Will Flack is not the chief executive of Bedford Borough Council, so don't try it. Yeah, so I was just giving that as a silly example. Right, where are we up to? I've now lost my place. Awesome. Yeah, done that. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, as far as I know, every council's like head honcho is a chief exec rather than a director. I don't know if that's like a, I don't know why that would be, but I think everyone I've ever seen is called a chief exec. That'll be their title. So, um, next question, I think, if I haven't missed anything there. So, question 11. So, what if mum of four is moved from refuge to refuge, which has impacted kids on schooling? How long does she have to wait to be rehoused? Really good question. Okay, let's let's try and give a pretty comprehensive answer here. So, if you're in a refuge, you're legally homeless. Now, I know you've got a roof over your head, but you're legally homeless whilst you're in a refuge. And it frustrates me that refuges are not quick at basically helping you get access to housing in that particular local authority area. So, if you're fleeing domestic abuse, you can go to any council in the country and they can't refer you back to an area where you are at risk. So, that's, I guess, an important thing to bear in mind. So, if you go to a refuge up in Newcastle, then you can make a homeless application to Newcastle Council, Borough Council, whatever it's called, City Council, the same day or the next, the day you kind of wake up afterwards, whatever, just to kind of get your head together. So, I guess the question I've got is, for someone who's going refuge to refuge, you need to approach the specific council and made a homeless application to that council. And appreciate, in one sense, one of the reasons why I'm compiling the average waiting times in every local authority area in the country is that there is a massive difference in waiting times between Waltham Forest and Ipswich Town or Ipswich City or whatever it's, whether it's a town or a city. It's a town, isn't it? But so if it really doesn't matter to you where you're going to end up, in fact, I just might as well share it so you can kind of pause the screen and just let me just share the screen so you can kind of, it's not complete yet because I'm still waiting on about 50 councils to actually respond, and several councils couldn't be bothered to actually give me the stats because it was too much trouble apparently. But let me just open it up and we can kind of scan through it. So I just kind of I'll give this answer like using these figures to kind of illustrate it a little bit. And for some reason my Excel has been incredibly slow. Just getting there. Hold on. So sorry about this. My computer's for some reason trying to do 100 things at once. I'm getting there, guys. I've just opened Photoshop accidentally. It's really massive. It's a really big program. Hold on. Here we go. I think this is it. Go on, Zoom. You can do it. Cool. Can you guys see that? Yeah. Yeah. Can you see an Excel sheet? No. Yeah. Cool. Right. Okay. So, yeah. I'll kind of scan down. You can kind of pause it to see if you can see your council. So let's give an example. Let's say literally someone's fleeing domestic abuse and it does not matter where they go. If they go to Bolsover, which is like Derbyshire, I think, somewhere around there, and let's say they've got 4 kids, but let's say a 3-bed property is going to be big enough for those 3 kids. The average waiting time once the main duty is accepted, which could be a few months technically to get that far, is only 50 days. So you can see the difference there between applying to Bolsover and applying to Brighton and Hove, where the average wait for a 3-bed is 2,800 days. What's that, like 8 years or something? So this is, as I say, I'm going to be putting this data out fully when I've got it all back. But I'll scan through it now so you can kind of pause it and just kind of find your council if it's on there yet. If it's not on there, it's just because they haven't responded. But so yeah, I guess I'm making a point. If it literally doesn't matter where you're going to be, you can use this data to kind of pick a place, and that's going to be the place which you'll get house fastest at. Nearly there. So yeah, cool. So that kind of grounds the answer we're trying to give here. Just go back to the question to make sure I'm not straying too far from it. So yeah, so let's try and tie this down. So someone in that situation can apply to any council. They just need to make an application. And again, using the same kind of tips that I gave in that video about the best way to make a homeless application, do it in an email, use all the steps I kind of laid out. And someone who's homeless because of domestic abuse and has children is in priority need twice over. Not that that makes a difference. You know, you're in priority need already. And that means, and you won't be intentionally homeless, again, if you fled domestic abuse. So you can approach any council in the country. They'll all have the main duty to you once they've reached their final decision, which will take at least 56 days, usually 56 in a few days to kind of make the decision. And then you should get onto the housing register at a very high banding. So that's kind of the way it would work. So really, you know, you want to be applying to a council rather than be going, you know, push from pillar to post in different refuges, which I know happens a lot. And I know a lot of councils kind of push people onto refuges and try and avoid actually housing you. But that's what you want to do. You want to kind of work out which councils to apply to and then just follow that process. So that's my answer. Guys, do you guys want to kind of give a, you know, kind of go in a different direction with that answer at all, or add anything in or take anything away? If not, no, okay. Hopefully that was helpful. And for that person, I wish them all the best. I'm just checking. I think this is the next question. Shannon's usually pretty good at pointing out when I've missed one. No, hold on. Actually, copy and paste. So there's just a follow-up question to the move into Kent. I mean, if they've got a job in Kent, the same deal applies in terms of if they're not homeless, then they don't have housing needs. And so I don't think that's going to help them, you know, kind of go down the homeless route or the housing register route. You know, if you've got a job, then potentially that might mean you can then afford to find private rented in Kent. But I don't think it's going to help you with actually getting housed through the council. Okay, so next question is a good one. That, oh my word. So sorry, I am genuinely pressing copy. It's just not doing it. There we go. So yeah, housing officer, number 12, housing officer sent my friend to a shared accommodation with a small room the size of a prison cell. He wants one bed with living room. How does he do that? So this is a difficult situation because the council is unlikely to have a duty to do anything else in this situation. Because again, although it's not, you know, it's very unpleasant situation, you know, potentially a very unpleasant situation to be in if, you know, particularly if you've got unruly housemates or whatever, you would be classed as being suitably housed unless there is something about this accommodation which specifically changes that. So yeah, it's difficult to make that kind of argument. So really, again, although technically there are some routes into making a homeless application, it's a very high hurdle to cross. You know, so let's say you had very serious PTSD and living, and you know your housemates are nightmares, and it's kind of triggering lots of symptoms of that. Then in that situation, you might be able to make a homeless application and get the council's help that way. But that would require some very detailed evidence from medical professionals, which is quite difficult to get, even if it's there. So I think that's, you know, ultimately that's, yeah, it's a bit like supported accommodation. It acts as a bit of a trap, to be honest. You know, you get placed there and then you can't really get back into the system or get housed elsewhere unless you're able to find some sort of accommodation yourself. And I guess potentially the local housing allowance might cap the amount of money you can get from UC if you're under 35, unless one of the exemptions apply. So exemptions like if you've ever been a victim of domestic abuse, or if you've ever lived in supported accommodation for more than 3 months, or if you've been in care, those kind of things can kick in. But other than that, unfortunately, there isn't a lot that the homeless application has to offer you unless you become homeless from it again. Now, if you deliberately become homeless, you run a very high risk of being found intentionally homeless, so it's not going to help. If the landlord was to serve a Section 21 notice, no fault eviction, then you would, you know, be able to start the process again. But that's unfortunately that's I don't have anything more positive to say about that situation. I can't see another way out of it unless you're able to find accommodation yourself. You might be able to move into supported accommodation that has a route into social housing, but that takes years, and a lot of supported accommodation doesn't even do that anymore. They just kind of keep you in supported accommodation for years. So I don't know if that's really going to, I think it's just kind of jumping into the fire out of the frying pan or whatever the saying is. So yeah, I don't know. Again, guys, have you got anything else to add into that? I don't. It's a difficult situation to end up in, unfortunately.
I don't, but I think you did miss a question. Not the Avengers question, but one about have a
I
friend
didn't
who
do the
is in
Avengers question. Say again,
um,
Shannon.
So there was an Avengers question, but there's also a question about I have a friend who is temporary accommodation and wondering if their home situation would affect their spouse's indefinite visa. Would they use the homeless situation to negatively impact it? Which I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't have a clue, but
Yeah.
it
I'm
has
also
been a
just
question.
yeah. Well, let's stick it in. I don't know either, but that's why there's four of us. Right. Sorry, guys. I do know how to use a computer. Honest. It's just not. Yeah, we are. So yeah, friends in temporary accommodation. I'm wondering if the home situation would affect their spouse indefinite visa, and would they use the home situation to negatively impact it? So I don't know that. I mean, I don't know how it would affect it.
I could
But again, yeah, go on,
help.
Mark.
I think the I'm not sure what's meant by indefinite visa. I think it might mean indefinite leave to remain or continued leave to remain application. Because if you remember the way in which you can obtain leave to remain or make an application is usually on the basis that you're going to be self-supporting. So you don't make an application and say, I'd like to apply for permission to stay here, but I'd like to sign on straight away, which actually makes perfect sense if you haven't got any money. But the way in which the Home Office approaches is that you've got to show that you could support yourself as a prerequisite. So the danger is that if you get limited leave to remain, you have to renew it 3 times, and then after 10 years you can get indefinite leave. Now, if you apply for local authority housing during that time, then when you come to renew, they could say, oh, you said you were going to be self-supporting and now you're not. You're applying for council housing on the basis that you're homeless. So you've contradicted what you said, or you've gone against what you said. And for a long time, I was telling people, oh, don't worry about that. They won't notice. And that, it's not a crime to become homeless. But then somebody else who knows more about immigration law said, yeah, it is something to worry about. It could be a factor, but it's probably not going to be a decisive factor. And I'm sorry I can't say yes or no definitely, but I would say yes, it could be, but it's not as bad, say, as getting convicted of criminal offences or something. But I appreciate that most people who are going through the indefinite leave process, it's a nightmare and it's a ghastly process, which I think is really inhumane, if only for the fees that people have to pay. So I can understand it's very stressful and it does deter, quite a lot of people get deterred from applying. But I think on balance, it's not going to make the difference, I don't think, between success or failure. So, and often you're really faced between a rock and a hard place because you're not really going to. The problem is if you say, I don't want to apply as homeless because it might have an adverse effect on my status, sleeping rough is, it may be that if you had to report where you've been living and you say, I've been sleeping rough, they'll say, well, that's not very good either. So it's probably best not to worry too much about it. So sorry, that's a bit of a vague answer.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks, Will. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes the answer just is vague, isn't it? And we just don't know. We just don't know what might happen. But yeah, cool. Hey, what, Cheeseface? Sorry, we started late today. It's nice to have you here. So yeah, just someone just asked another question about how long does one wait for a permanent one-bed flat in London? So the figures I've just kind of, I mean, if you go back and have a look at the Excel sheet when I flash it on the screen there, I mean, they're obviously averages, but I would say particularly for London, because there are so many people going through the system, that they're probably reasonably reliable to use as averages. And you'll see in London that, even the kind of best local authorities in London in terms of the shortest waiting times are still a couple of years for a single person. So obviously there's the option that councils might be getting people into private rented accommodation much more quickly. which I think, if I understand the way councils work, is probably quite likely. But yeah, in terms of social housing, you're looking at, you know, years in London, best case scenario. And it seems like the majority of people who even kind of who might be eligible won't get it. They'll get private rented. Yeah, so there's not a so that Excel sheet, as I say, is a working document. I haven't finished it yet because I'm still getting responses back. It's probably going to be another month at least before I can publish it. It'll be published on Will. Well, it should be Will's happy with it. It'll be published on Will's website as one of the resources. So, but I will kind of do a video where I explain the methodology of it, because it's meant to be helpful, but it's not kind of gospel. You know, there's going to be times when actually either the council's give me the wrong figures, or it's just an average. So, you know, the average might be 2 years, but that doesn't mean that you won't be there 10 years. It's just the way that, you know, the world works. So yeah, okay. So yeah, I think I'm gonna have to wait until I do that video properly about the Excel sheet, so I can show the information properly and you can see it yourself. So, what if a family of 8? Oh, what have I just done? I've just pressed the button and it's all gone. Oh gosh. Hold on. Oh no, it's all right. I think we're right. No. So yeah, I just noticed there's a few people asking questions in the first person. If I could just ask you to rephrase those questions, that helps me out. It stops you having to share your personal data, which is good. So I'm going to leave those questions for the time being and only answer questions that are anonymized. So this question 14 is a good example of an anonymized question. What if a family of 8 is advised by their caseworker to split into 2 claims? Any way to undo this, or any drawbacks? Now, council should not be asking families to split up. Although I guess they can kind of tell you the facts that maybe, you know, if you were happy to split into 2, that you might get housed more quickly. So yeah, but they certainly can't force you. They can't tell you, oh, you know, we're not going to house you. So I mean, I'm trying to think of some reasonably recent cases where there were huge, you know, relatively big families who the council owed a duty to, and even when the council placed, I think they placed a family across 2 adjacent hostel, like kind of rooms or whatever, that was found to be unlawful, because you have a right to a private life. You have a right to live with your family, and councils can't be interfering with that. So their job, you know, they should have realised that there are big families in the world, and therefore sometimes they're going to have to house those big families, and should have, you know, years ago, decades ago, ensured that there was enough, you know, accommodation that was big enough for different types of households. So again, anyone want to add anything to that question? Because I think that's all I've got to say about it, really. Council can't make you split up. However, let's say you've got a situation where actually the family would be happy with that situation, then yeah, you could discuss it as an option. You just can't be forced into it. So I think if they're forcing you into it, you complain. Will?
Yeah, I think in practical terms, it might be worth thinking about, because the chances of, I mean, I don't know, a family of 8, I don't know what sort of size property they're looking at, but it is very difficult to get any properties that are over 4 bedrooms. And I mean, I guess if you got to the situation where you were saying, no, we will not accept anything else, then you're back into that sort of El Kundi Croydon situation where if they're saying, sorry, we haven't got anything, and the last time we had a 6-bedroom property was sort of 5 years ago or something, you could, in theory, go to court and say, well, what constitutes suitable accommodation for us is X. The council have a statutory duty to provide X. They haven't, so they should go out and buy something if necessary. But I've not come across cases like that happening. So if anybody has, then please let me know.
I mean, it sounds like some. I mean, that argument legally is fairly straightforward, but you're going to need a solicitor involved. So, on Will's website, he's got a list of solicitors that take legal aid and for housing cases. So, if you just search for Will Flack Law, you'll find his website, and on the resources page, there's like a tab for it. In a minute, I'll just dig out the link and put it in the live chat. So, Shannon's just like rolling her eyes at me. I can tell because I can't figure out how to copy and paste a bit of text.
You wasn't for once. It's really
inside.
difficult.
You were. I know you were.
I wasn't. There's lots of people watching, and I've recently had to share my screen and type in front of one person, and I can't tell you how difficult it was. So, fair play, Mike.
No, cool. Okay. Well, question 15. We're going to just signpost a video. So, how long after you've been to court do you have to physically leave? So, one answer to that is potentially several months. It just depends on how efficient the courts are being. So unfortunately, we can't give you a definite timescale. However, by this stage, you will almost certainly be legally homeless. So if you're in priority need, or if there's reasons to believe that you might be in priority need, the council should have already offered you suitable interim accommodation by this point. So if you go on the video on this channel and you search for wait for the bailiffs, or any like phrase with bailiffs in it, you'll find that video where I go into a bit more a lot more detail about that idea. But yeah, I mean, I think, Will, you've said that, you know, the way courts are working at the moment, it's not unusual for the whole process to take more than 6 months from the Section 21 expiring through to the bailiff actually being involved. Is that about right? Are you seeing worse than that these days? Are you on mute?
I'm seeing some pretty bad things at the moment. I had a possession case yesterday. No, it was listed for today, and it's admittedly it's not a Section 21 case. It's a council rent arrears case. It was originally listed for a hearing in Bromley County Court on the 18th of December 2023. We went to court and they said, "Oh, we haven't got anyone. Go over to Bexley Magistrates Court. They'll find someone there." Or Bexley County Court. And so we went there, nobody there. So they adjourned it, didn't give us another hearing date until today, 7th of November. So that was 11 months. And then yesterday they sent us a message saying, "Sorry, no judges. Please send us your dates to void." So if they manage to do that again, we'll be coming up to our 3rd year since it was listed. It's not quite so bad for Section 21 cases. But could I say in the answer to the question, how long after you've been to court? The question is, what have you been to court for, and what happened when you were there, really? Because if you went to court and the judge made a possession order, then it could be that the judge said for possession forthwith, which means it takes effect straight away. It could be that they've got a discretion usually to allow up to 6 weeks. I think that's right, 6 weeks, or maybe 7. No, it's 6 weeks, sorry. So they could say possessions take effect in 42 days, and then you still don't have to leave on the date the possession order says. It's at that date that they can issue a bailiff's warrant. So a bailiff's warrant becomes a possibility on the date when the possession order takes effect. And that can take, well, that depends then on how quickly the landlord issues. I've got a case today where the landlord told the local authority, "Don't worry, we're not going to enforce the order." So they'll never have to leave according to that. But after they've issued the application, it normally takes about 4 to 6 weeks for the eviction date to be set. So you could work that out, but that would be 6 weeks from the date they issue it. And then if it took 2 weeks to issue it, that's 8 weeks. And then, so at the very worst, if the judge made a forthwith order and everything happened quite fast, you'd be looking at about 8 weeks. But after, you could be looking at, multiples of that.
So that's all really helpful. I've just noticed that this question is actually coming from Wales. So I don't know if that I mean, the person just said so there's no fault eviction in Wales already. So it might be that what Will's just said is very, very helpful if you're living in England, but if you're living in Wales, it's not a whole lot of good because it's different there. So I don't know.
But it's the same thing if a possession order is made, whether it's Section 21 or Schedule 2 or whatever the one for secure tenancies is in the Housing Act 1985. It still depends on what happens and what the judge says. And I mean, the judge could make a suspended order, or it's not it doesn't follow naturally that you would have to leave at all. But I'm assuming what you mean by being to court means after you get a possession order. So I would say, assuming it's not a 6 weeks delay, you're probably looking at about 3 months, so 2 to 3 months average.
Cool, thanks, Will. So, what's going on?
Sorry, can I just add to that question?
Yeah.
If you'll be sent a copy of the court order or what was ordered in court, but if it's a quicker eviction, depending on the post, it'll be when it's issued and when it gets to you. Also, if you had a duty advisor there on the day, or you could ask the court clerk if for any reference or dates that they were given in that order, in that court hearing. They might answer you if you were given specific days.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So my live chats have got rather confusing. I think this is the next question, but if it's not, so again, some people have just put some questions in the first person, so I'm just going to ask them to rephrase it. It's also now 9:30, so guys, if you need to leave, then please do, because it's obviously late, even later than normal. I'll try and crunch through the remaining questions, and I'll probably say this is kind of we'll kind of call time on new questions from this point, so they roll over to either Will's on Monday or next week on this channel. So a friend is based in one borough, they're sent to another borough, so he has to pay rent to the main borough he's from and pay council tax in another. Would this help his claim? I guess what you're talking about here about claim for moving boroughs, it wouldn't. No, that wouldn't kind of change this. The first borough, the first council is the one with any duty that's owed. The fact they house you temporarily or even permanently in a different borough, it's still the kind of the first council's job to ultimately house you or whatever, or kind of run you through that process. So you can't. Well, I mean, you can accrue local connection if you're in temporary accommodation, but you need to then kind of make a fresh application to a different council, so it gets very complicated. So I don't think it does help you as probably the most usual answer to that. So in terms of contacting us directly, I had a shitty reply on the channel this week, actually. So I'm a painter and decorator. I do not have time. I do try and do a bit of casework when I can. But certainly I'm at capacity in terms of what I do. I know Will is almost always at capacity. So that's kind of, that's the reality of it. As I say, Will's got this list of solicitors who can get legal aid for housing cases, but that's about as good as we could do, plus do these live streams to kind of help people out as best we can. But there's not enough solicitors around. That's the bottom line. Unfortunately, I'm certainly not in a position to help people individually almost all the time, really. So apologize, that's not very helpful, but that's the reality of it, I guess, at the moment. So again, I'm trying to just keep track of questions here. Asked in terms of bidding, how long after allocated temporary accommodation can you access bidding stage, and how do you go about doing this when homeless prevention officers are absent in action? So in theory, if you're in temporary accommodation, then you should already be in the relief duty stage, which means you have to be on the housing register, even if it's a very low banding. It might be the lowest banding of all, so it might not actually lead you to get housed, but that's your legal right. And if your homeless prevention officer is AWOL, then again it comes back to complaining. You complain to the council, or the chief exec of the council is, I'm in relief duty, I should be able to bid at this point, and I'm not able to because I don't have a functioning housing officer. And essentially try see what happens with that. But as I say, even if the complaint was upheld, in the relief stage, it's very unlikely you're going to get housed. But again, I guess I'm probably reading a bit more into it than I need to there. We could also be talking about someone who is owed the main housing duty already, and therefore it is worth kind of pushing all the way with that, because you've got a realistic prospect of getting housed at some point in the coming months or years. Will, have you unmuted because you want to add something to that one, or is that
No, so I just remained on mute from before.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. Just to say that I just removed a dickhead, just saying about, if you can't afford kids, don't have them. We live in a welfare state, my friends, and we want the best for children, and we want there to be a safety net. Countries who have safety nets are better. Interesting studies around the ability to take kind of entrepreneurial risk if you've got a decent safety net. So appreciate the person saying just calling it out. Thank you. Just trying to work out how to make sense of this question is just to see how we're going. Do any of you on the panel work at council? So no. Yeah, so none of us work at council, work for council. So Will and Karis's job is basically arguing with councils, and then me and Shannon kind of do sort of training and kind of just try and help people out indirectly, I guess is probably the best way to say it. So I don't know if that answers that question.
There is it does raise an interesting question, which I wondered if anybody knows of, is that there's advocate, sort of solicitors and barristers are technically advocates I think in Europe they tends to be the word for lawyer. But that's in English. In English, it has a slightly more subtle meaning that an advocate could be somebody who just speaks on behalf of somebody, and that can appear when somebody suffers from a disability, say, and they have difficulty in communicating. You'd think that there might be an obligation for the council to provide somebody to act as an advocate, in that they could then talk to that person in a sort of sympathetic way, or in a way that was perhaps trauma informed or whatever, and then speak on their behalf. But I've never come across that happening. I mean, you get sort of people to assist with people who are victims of domestic violence, but anyone heard of that happening?
So I feel like, and I could be completely wrong because it was years ago, I feel like I did some research into like when you're entitled to a legal advocate, and the housing sort of application, the homeless application process isn't a situation where you're legally entitled to an advocate in like a professional sense. I think it's mainly around health issues, from what I remember, is when you can be, or like employment issues. You can be entitled to like a legal advocate in that sense. Or if you've been like sectioned, there's then mental health advocates, and there's certain, again, I can't remember like the
There's IMCA's independent mental capacity advisor, which kind of or advocate can act in
yeah,
that sort of situation. I think.
I feel
And
like it was
even
quite a niche.
with the police, you do like responsible adult. So you have to have a responsible adult there. If you're a vulnerable adult, you have a responsible adult, is it?
You're
People are like,
it's got a different name. Like I know what you mean.
yeah,
Appropriate adult. I think it's the yeah.
yeah,
Um,
I'm saying responsible.
But the good news is that if you are homeless, and that's in the broadest sense of the word, I mean you're eligible, you're within scope for legal aid to get an advocate in the lawyer sense of the word. But the bad news, and you'd have to be financially eligible, but most people who are homeless are not wealthy. But the problem is there's this lack of capacity, so it's difficult to find lawyers. And the system is so complicated now that you almost need a lawyer just to make sense of what's being said to you. So I think that was, you'd have to just try and get a lawyer. That's the outcome of that. So,
cool. Okay. I was kind of just multitasking, and so I'm assuming what you just said there covers the question, whatever it was. So thanks, guys. Next one, I think the penultimate one in the, as I say, I've called time in the live stream chat for further questions. Otherwise, I think we're going to be here all night. So if you've got more questions, just put them, wait for next week, or put them into a comment on the video section, and I'll kind of line them up for next week. So this one here, number 18. Friend made homeless application 3 weeks in advance of being homeless, but council clearly didn't accept it as made to make a new one on the day she was homeless. Is this lawful? No, it's not. So you can make a homeless application within 56 days, or if it's likely you're going to be homeless within 56 days. However, if you were to complain about something like that, the complaint might be upheld even if it went to the LGO. But the reality is that you might not get any compensation at all, or it might be like £100 compensation, by which time it's not really worth the effort because it takes hours to get that point. But yeah, so I think, yeah, bottom line is, again, this is why I kind of, we hammer the point home about making an application via email, because that's just your smoking gun evidence that you did in fact make an application on that date. So they should have, if you're threatened with homelessness, as in you're likely to be homeless within 56 days, the prevention duty should kick in, and you should get a personalised housing plan. There should be some prevention work done to try and stop you becoming homeless, and if that's not possible, that should roll smoothly into the relief duty, and then kind of the additional support you're going to get from that point. So yeah, it's unlawful. However, I'm not sure how worth it is pursuing it, particularly with the council. because I don't know that there's a lot to gain from doing so. Obviously, as with anything like this, the more important question is showing that you're in priority needs. That's probably what you want to focus on at this point, because that's the kind of the thing that's going to make the difference in terms of the council having a duty to put a roof over your head. So hopefully that kind of makes sense on that. So this comes back to this question of a family of 8. Split into 2 claims to ease housing applications, ends up separated far apart. So the wife, main carer for a mother-in-law and 2 kids, can't drive. So essentially, the only reason why I think you could possibly have a trouble in kind of complaining about this is if you agreed to it at the time. So if the council said, do you know what, if you split into 2 households, you're going to get housed more quickly, and you said, okay, that sounds fine, and then the reality of it kicks in a few months later, and you find that you're actually, you can't function as a family, then you might still be able to do something about it, but you can't really blame the council for it if you kind of said, okay, I'm okay with that. So you can make a homeless application if you don't have accommodation which is available for all of your household, and your household is essentially defined as people who would reasonably be expected to live with you, which would definitely include like actual blood relatives or married or spouses or whatever. It can also include carers in some situation. So you could actually make a fresh homeless application and say, yeah, we're both housed in different properties, but we want to live together. It's reasonable to live together. So you could basically make a homeless application, but then you're going to go back to the bottom of the queue in terms of actually having accommodation available to you. So I think, again, someone in that situation really, really, really needs to get a solicitor, because there's very little prospect, I think, of winning that without a solicitor kind of fighting the battle for you. Because as Will said earlier, a council might well just literally admit the fact they don't have suitable housing available for someone with this size household, and you need a solicitor then to kind of sit on the council to actually do the right thing at that point. It's very difficult as a lay person to do that, I think. So yeah, there is just that, but yeah, so when I removed that person from the chat, all the messages went. Yeah, it's just the way it works apparently. So last question from the live chat for the night, and then there's a couple more that have come in.
There's one that we've missed from
okay.
The person who was asking about the person being removed. I don't know if it's because it was in first person.
Yeah, so I think there was one in the first person. I've lost.
And it was over a few messages. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just trying to copy and paste. It's not allowing me to do it for some reason. I don't know what's going on.
You can put it in the Zoom chat if that's.
Yeah, so in fact the last question I was looking at is actually again in the first person. So again, I know I'm being pedantic, but it's important. There's just stuff in there which essentially identifies you. So if you want to just rephrase the question into the third person and ask it next week, or ask it as a comment in the video on the channel, we'll be able to get back to it. So as I say, there is some more kind of discussion going on in live chat. Going back to the questions that have come in through the week, I think we've got 2 more. And again, we're just going to answer it fairly quickly because they're fairly straightforward. So I don't actually know what section 24 is. However, I think I can still answer this question. So no longer allowed to live with parents' house, living with friends' house due to abusive behaviour. I have 2 kids, homeless, band A, am I classed as homeless? Almost certainly yes, but you'd have to check out your council's policy, because some councils have, although most councils follow the band A to D kind of thing, and generally speaking, band A will be homeless applicants or band B will be homeless applicants. We can't tell you from this end whether that's the case. You need to check out the housing allocation scheme. So if you Google your council's name and then housing allocation scheme, you'll get their policy, and that's kind of how it works. So you can you have to find it out for yourself. And actually, I've already answered that one about kind of a council being a housing officer not responding to emails. The answer is complain. So thanks, Will, Karis, and Shannon, for sticking around so late. Appreciate it. Sorry for those who we didn't get around to your questions this week. As I say, Will's live stream is on Monday night, so if you want to roll your questions over to his channel. In fact, if you just want to literally just take your questions and stick it on a video on Will's channel, he'll get a notification and we can come to it on the Monday one, I'm sure. So yeah, Yeah, so yeah, it's an interesting kind of thing. I think that leads to a discussion there. But yeah, we'll have to roll it to another week. So yeah, guys, as always, we hope this has
Sorry,
been. Oh,
can
you
I
gone?
just
Well,
say that were you looking at the end of the live stream? Sorry, the comments
yeah, I was just
coming
kind of
in.
seeing a few bits which I thought, yeah,
Yeah,
kind of is
about the
interesting.
solicitors saying they haven't got capacity. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean
yeah,
that's a longer discussion, but let's try and have that. If you come to my channel on Monday, we'll try and talk about that. Because I've got a couple of suggestions, but I don't think we've got time to go into it now.
yeah, yeah, cool. So yeah, and for those who aren't subscribed to Will's channel yet, if you just search on YouTube for Will Flack, Will Flack Law or
Is
Will
it
Flack, I can't
your
remember.
channel? Yeah, I think it
Yeah, Will
is.
Flack Law channel. You'll find them. Just subscribe and you'll get it all. All right, guys. Yeah. So hopefully this has been reasonably helpful. As with all these things, hopefully the information will make a difference if you stick at it, but we obviously can't guarantee it will. And yeah, just kind of hope wish all the best for you really in these difficult situations. So just keep, yeah, all you can do is just keep going with it really.